Hello from Florida. I am recording video 17 in my set of 31 videos about how to use a glucose meter as a fuel gauge, a personalized fuel gauge. I'm recording from a YMCA parking lot while our daughter and grandson are doing a mommy and me exercise class in the background. Well, skip that idea. I realized that the wind was going to make that an unpleasant thing for people to have to listen to, the wind on the video. So never mind. I'll just sit in the car and do the recording from here, or start the recording from here. The whole thing won't be done from here, but I needed to get it started. Today, the topic is day 16 of the DataDriven Fasting Challenge. And the challenge can be done for free using the link in the description box, joining the DataDriven Fasting community that is an off Facebook community, and it's free to join. And all the information one would need to do a 30-day challenge, solo, self-led, is available for free in the DataDriven Fasting community. So the links are in the description box. There are also links to join a paid challenge so that you could be part of a group doing this together for 30 days. And those 30 days include weekend lives, Q&As, where people can ask their questions and get a week by week, this is what is coming, this is what you can expect, this is how you can help yourself during the coming week. And there are 5 of those. The challenge typically starts on a Saturday in the States. And so each Saturday for the 30 days, with a final Saturday wrap up, the Q&A live Zoom is included. And for those that can't attend live, because they're in the paid challenge, they can access the live as a recording and watch it at their convenience. The topic for day 16 is the personal fat threshold. There will be a link in the description box to an article explaining what a personal fat threshold is. One of the statements for day 16 is, it says our body fat is our largest fuel tank. During this challenge and during my TrimHealthyMama life, fuel is either carbohydrates or fats, or those two things can be together. So both TrimHealthyMama and DataDriven Fasting encourage a separation of fuels, eating on either end of the fuel spectrum, so either fats or carbs. But the more you bring those two fuels together, the more challenged the body is in working through those fuels, and there's more likely to be storage, because the body works best when it only has to work with one fuel as its main fuel source. We're never going to eat, we're almost never going to eat a pure isolated food of just carbohydrates or just fats or just protein, those 3 major macromolecules. But we can certainly do something to move the levers for ourselves, prioritizing protein and using one or the other of the fuels. I'll put up an image about something that represents that we can kind of toggle the switches for ourselves. We have different levers we can pull and help our bodies so that it only has to deal with protein and fat, or protein and carbs. So I will put up an image for day 16 that represents this personal fat threshold idea that is today's focus. And on the image, it says that body composition is metabolic health. And on the top of the image, you see a sort of a body that is healthy looking in terms of it's trim and it's got the right sort of balance and structure. And then on the bottom part, you see a body that is over fueled and is carrying around a lot of fuel, and that is not metabolically healthy for us to do. Now, in famine situations, the overweight person with an overfat body is going to be at an advantage. They will last longer through a famine because they've got this fuel that they're walking around with. So, if you're expecting a famine anytime soon, you have a leg up. That reminds me, during my 24 years of homeschooling, covering the educational needs of 4 children through 24 years, I read a lot of historical fiction as part of our schooling. And I remember reading stories that referred to the overweight women being a little, or a plump woman being a little more desirable as a spouse because it meant that she came from a more prosperous family that had more food. And so to choose her meant you were aligning yourself with a little more prosperous family that had more fuel, had more food, fuel. Yes, I get those. Never mind. Back to the day 16 information. It says most people develop type 2 diabetes after gaining a lot of weight. Their fat stores become full and energy backs up and overflows into the rest of their body. But some are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes while they are still relatively lean. And it says that you may have heard of the phrase TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. TOFI. So some people carry their weight around their middles as jiggly subcutaneous fat, while other people store their fat as visceral fat surrounding internal organs. Your personal fat threshold, which is the topic of day 16, personal fat threshold, refers to the amount of energy your body fat can store comfortably without overflowing. We don't fully understand how or why people develop their own unique personal fat threshold, but ethnicity, inflammation, age, diet, activity level, toxins, and infection all seem to play a role. The next section says, similar to glucose, having too much glucose in the bloodstream in circulation, it's dangerous to have too much fat in your bloodstream. So body fat functions as a sponge to mop up any excess energy floating around in your bloodstream, and that's to protect you. But as a sponge can only soak up so much liquid, there is a limit to how much energy your body fat can absorb. Once you reach your personal fat threshold, your blood glucose also, that affects that, and it starts to rise. And excess energy then backs up and overflows into your bloodstream as it approaches maximum capacity. With nowhere left to go, extra energy is eventually stored as fat around your internal organs. There's a question here. What's the worst type of fat to have? Fat on the outside of your body may not look great. The adipose fat. It's not really on the outside of your skin, but it's on those outside layers of your body. But fat on the inside, the fat around your organs, that is particularly dangerous to your health. That kind of fat is known as visceral fat. And it's linked to a long list of health conditions. The information in day 16 says, in addition, by the time you see blood glucose levels that are elevated, your body has already done everything it can to keep you safe by storing the excess dietary energy, which is circulating fat and glucose, it's done everything it can by storing that excess energy as body fat. And then I'll put up this image that says, being insulin resistant does not make you fat. Being fat makes you insulin resistant. I'm back at the house, and now it's time to get back to the topic of your personal fat threshold for day 16 and insulin resistance. So I'm going to put up an image of the 30-day challenge overview so that you can see that. And today, day 16, our topic is the personal fat threshold. And one of the things that I'd like to point to for this day, in addition to taking our waking glucose and our morning fasting glucose, it's recommended that we would also record our weight, our body fat, our selfie if we're doing that, and our waist measurement. One of the resources I'll point you to is some information on reversing non-alcoholic fatty liver. There is a lady that I know that does intermittent fasting, and she uses her glucose information, and I can link a podcast that she was on where she talks about discovering that she had non-alcoholic fatty liver, and that is very much tied to insulin resistance. And she'd reached her personal fat threshold, and her body was being overwhelmed. Her liver was being overwhelmed with taking on too much energy storage. The lady's name is Roxy, and you'll find information on her, the link to a podcast she appeared on telling her story, and a link to a newsletter that she was written up about, that her story was written about, and that's at the very end of the newsletter if you use that link to read her story. But she completely turned around her fatty liver situation by paying attention to her glucose and using some intermittent fasting. Because of the topic of insulin resistance, some people can think that insulin is a bad thing and we just want to get it lower. But we need some insulin. Insulin is a good thing. I'm going to put up two different images about insulin. This first one points outward from the word insulin, and it points to all the things that insulin does for us. Of course, we know that it lowers blood sugar by moving blood sugar helping blood sugar move from circulating in our blood system, moving it into muscle tissue, our liver, and then into our adipose tissue. But it also happens to allow minerals to get into our cells. And it helps us to synthesize protein, amino acids, and build more muscle. And let's see, what's it? So yes, on the top left at about the 11 o'clock hour, it says allows amino acids into the cell. Now, here's an interesting thing. Marty Kendall of OptimizingNutrition.com is providing this information about data-driven fasting based on the fact that he's married to a type 1 diabetic. And through the years, he has been studying her and learning all that he's able to now teach us. In addition to his wife being a type 1 diabetic, their son, who is an older teenager, was diagnosed not this December, but a year ago December. He suddenly, his pancreas stopped producing insulin, and he is a type 1 diabetic now, dependent on insulin. So without insulin, Marty's wife and son would melt away and die. I will link a podcast where Marty and his son were interviewed together by another type 1 diabetic, and you can hear their story if you want. And while it was a blow to Marty and his wife, that their son became a type 1 diabetic. What better family to be a type 1 diabetic in, with Marty at the head of the family, with all he knows about how to manage glucose. And so anyway, and their son is thriving. He actually recently broke I believe a world record for his age group in powerlifting. And I think I heard that he deadlifted 500 pounds. When he got on insulin, he started building more muscle. It's amazing. So insulin, while too much of it is not good for us, we must have some, and it serves a valuable purpose in our body. Now, the other image that I'm going to put up about insulin is on the topic of insulin resistance. So the top things that are pointing to insulin resistance are contributing factors to becoming insulin resistant. Our genetics, obesity and inactivity, aging. Just as we get older, our cells become less sensitive to insulin. Medications can also do it, and rare disorders. Now, out of insulin resistance, coming out of that issue, these are some of the results. Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, so our blood pressure can be raised. Dyslipidemia, I have a definition for that. Let me get that. Dyslipidemia is the imbalance of lipids, such as cholesterol, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, the LDL kind, triglycerides, and high density lipoprotein, HDL, the healthy kind. This condition can result from diet, tobacco exposure, or genetics, and can lead to cardiovascular disease with severe complications. So back to day 16's topic, which is our personal fat threshold. When we take on too much energy and we store it on our body and we don't give our body a chance to burn it off by letting our glucose lower, we can create a situation in our body where we have energy toxicity. And I have an image to put up for that too. This is one of Marty's images, chronic. It's labeled, the big label is energy toxicity, and unfortunately reminds me of an ice cream cone. But think more in terms of an iceberg, where you only see part of the energy or the iceberg coming from the top above the waterline, but below the waterline there's a whole lot more stored. And I think of that mentally as inside of my body there's a whole lot more energy stored that I can still access, and so I can afford to delay my eating a little bit and let my glucose fall, which allows my insulin level to lower, which then allows the opposing hormone of glucagon come out and do its job of releasing some energy from storage. It breaks apart the glycogen, which is stored glucose. It's kind of like pieces of glucose clicked together in long chains. Actually, I was just covering that in my nutrition class, and the image of glycogen was this chain laid out links of chain, and it represents glucose all being clicked together and stored in a mass. And then glycogen can, snip apart those pieces that are clicked together and release it back out into the circulation as glucose for the body to have a steady amount of sort of a teaspoon of glucose that our body really likes to maintain in blood circulation. So Marty's image, in the very fine print, it says, underneath the bigger heading of chronic diseases of hyperinsulinemia, that's just high insulin, these are the things that we can have: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, degenerative joint disease, renal failure, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, numerous cancers, sleep apnea, arteriosclerosis, that's the plaque in our arteries, asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, erectile dysfunction, acid reflux, osteoporosis, sarcopenia, psoriasis, inflammatory bowel disease, stroke, dementia, and coronary artery disease are but a few of the many conditions associated with elevated insulin, hyperinsulinemia. So having elevated insulin is like having insulin toxicity. The fundamental, and at the top of the image and at the bottom, I'll read those sentences. The fundamental problem is not insulin toxicity, but rather energy toxicity. If our insulin's high, it means there's energy that the insulin is keeping held into our body. If we didn't have the insulin, then if the insulin were lowered, then the glycogen, the other hormone, would be able to work, and it would let out that stored energy. So if a type 1 diabetic doesn't have insulin, they can melt away, just like they're losing more than fat. They're losing muscle and other tissue. Without insulin, a type 1 diabetic will melt away and die. Well, not melt away, but they won't be able to hold on to any energy. They'll be catabolically breaking down tissue instead of anabolically building up tissue. And see, when Marty's son started on insulin, he actually built muscle on his body. He became able to lift more because he had more muscle to work with. Back to the image, the sentence at the bottom of the image. It's the excess energy that is on our body that leads to increased insulin levels, but also it's this catch-22. The increased insulin levels then try to keep our energy on our body, tries to keep it held back like a dam holding back the water. I found another image that I want to share with you, and it's up on the screen now, and it says visceral fat. That's the fat that is around your organs, and it's like fatty liver too. Visceral fat is chemically active. So it's not just fat sitting on our body. There's chemical action going on because of this visceral fat. Visceral fat is chemically active, which may cause congestive heart failure. That's an ominous thought. Well, I don't know how organized this all was, but it's time for me to, I think, end the video for today and go be with our daughter and grandson and enjoy my precious time with them here too. So trying to keep my goal of making a video each day for the 30-day challenge, try to help people have information about the topic of each day, and just make it through this 30-day challenge. Oh, there is one last image I want to put up. Progress over perfection. We do not have to do everything perfectly every day of this challenge, nor every day of any day. We want to just keep trying to make improvements. And it's the little improvements and the little habits that we build that will stick with us. If we try to push hard and be perfect every single day, we're most likely going to fail. So just keep trying to make positive improvements. Keep trying to go towards that glucose trigger, your personal hunger trigger, and being close to it more often than not, or reaching it more often than not, is going to have a positive effect on your health and your wellness, your weight and your wellness. So that is it for day 16 of the 30-day data-driven fasting challenge, and for video number 17 of my set of 31 videos. Thank you for watching.